It's the 50th episode with the Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast. Yeah!
Party, party, party.
Welcome to those who get that reference.
50th episode of the Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast. This is very exciting. I am Devin Francis, also known as Leonard Meltzner.
And I am the one with the red hat, also known as Victoria.
And this is very exciting. We've come a long way in the last 18 months-ish. So, yeah, this is super cool. Here we are, 50th episode. What are we doing today, Victoria, for this monumental episode?
We are reviewing the Box&Karen.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Because Karen's the 50th episode of Odyssey, so we decided to be unoriginal, and by we, I mean Devin.
Yes. Well, I checked to see what the 50th episode was, and it was like Karen, and I was like, I love Karen.
I'm pretty sure I could have told you it was Karen.
Yeah, I knew it was like...
In fact, you knew it was Karen too. Why did you need to check?
Well, I knew if you asked me what episode 50 was, I would have said it's either like Karen or Connie Part 1 or 2, or like right within like a 3-episode range, I know.
Connie Part 1 is episode 51.
Yes, it is. But we'll get there. First, we have to talk about the Dropbox, episode 749, written by Nathan Hubler. This is the OAC episode for November, because obviously that is what month we are currently experiencing. And, let's go.
This episode is a true story.
Yes. Less Wit.
Minus
and
Wit and Eugene.
Yeah, exactly like the launch part 1 and 2 were basically the same kind of idea, except that Pastor Lee is not played by himself, whereas Dr. Valerie Sparks was played by herself, even though that's not her name in real life. So,
yeah, Valerie!
To sum up this episode, Wit and Eugene go to South Korea and meet Pastor Lee, who has adopted many, many, many children who are disabled both mentally and physically. And because of that, many mothers abandon their children to him so that he can look after them. In order to keep them more safe and anonymous, Wit and Eugene help him build a special Dropbox to deposit the babies in. And the government doesn't like it. Okay, so it's really nice that we get to add another country to the show's travel roster. What country is it, Victoria?
South Korea.
Yay, you remember this time.
Yes, of course I remembered. Why wouldn't I remember?
Of course not. I think it's crazy that Wit got invited that far away to speak for a conference. This isn't exactly the psychology department's annual dinner at Campbell County Community College.
I was
Do you agree?
so sad, so very sad when I heard that Wit was doing the public speaking thing, because Eugene's all just like, Wit, you're so good at public speaking, and he's like, it's one of the things you're best at, and I'm just sitting there, and I'm just so sad, because I'm like, that's because Jenny taught him how to do public speaking.
That's true.
I got so many feels in this episode whenever they talked about public speaking, and that shouldn't be a thing.
It shouldn't, but I'm glad it is. So we get a shout out to UPF, which is great as always. And I wonder if Eugene learned fragments of Korean specifically for this trip, or if he already knew them previously. Because I doubt he's known them for terribly long, because we all know that French is Eugene's only strong language apart from English.
45.
Hmm?
Him and Katrina
that's true. They also know the language that the Ashanti speak.
Yeah.
Touché. But I doubt that language much resembles Korean etymologically.
Still, they speak more than 2 languages.
You are correct. That is true. I forgot about that. Okay, so I didn't really know what to expect a lot going into this episode, and all of a sudden it's like, boom. This got like really heavy really fast. Those are like very serious disabilities that they're talking about with their son. I think it said that in real life, Pastor Lee, his His son has very severe cerebral palsy. And
I don't know about you, but I'm starting to think that the OAC is way darker than normal episodes. That's why you have to pay extra money for the dark stuff.
what, you mean like the Lone Lawman and In the Kingdom Far Away?
Yeah, and then all just that stuff about coughing blood, but who...
Except that was the pilot, which was part of album 57.
What about the perforated heart, which I totally called? Yeah, I should get a point for that. Add it to the roster, 8-1. Yeah. You are the 1. I am the 8.
Anyways, thank you for clarifying. So awesome. I didn't know which one I was right there.
You sure as heck aren't the 8. Don't get cocky.
23 years is a very long time to look after someone with so much time and money required to look after them. So that's crazy. And then you think about how many kids he's looking after on top of that. It's
how many kids was it?
A lot, like dozens and dozens.
Okay.
They weren't all at their house anymore, but...
Wait, is it only him?
And his wife. Okay.
His wife only had like 2 lines, I think.
Yeah, she was away somewhere or something. But yeah, this doesn't seem like the most efficient solution to the problem. Like when he's like, Wit, you are a very rich and resourceful and well-connected man. I really need your help. I need you to build a Dropbox so that people can more easily drop off babies to me and I will continue to look after them by myself. Like, yeah. I mean, I understand they're trying to stick with...
He needs to get hired help.
They were trying to stick with real life, but it doesn't seem...
So he has other people to help him.
Yeah, with Wit around, doesn't seem like the most efficient solution. I figured that he was going to ask Wit to help set up a broader reaching service to care for these children that would involve more than one couple looking after them. Because it's not like Wit doesn't have the money.
I have dozens of kids to look after. So then Wit's probably like, oh, so you want me to help you find people to help? He's like, no, I want you to create a way so I can get dozens of more kids in the span of half an hour.
Yeah, literally. He got 3 kids in one night.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But seriously, this was such an incredible episode.
That man is amazing.
A huge issue today, and it's a very heavy topic. I'm also really glad, very, very glad, that the child services worker guy raised the points that he did, because it's a really valid point examining the balance between providing help for a need and worrying that you might be facilitating the perpetuation of something bad. And that applies to a lot of other things too. That's the same thing with the argument over legal abortion clinics. It's like people don't want people to have abortions willy-nilly, and so people are like, we shouldn't legalize abortion clinics because that's going to encourage people to have more abortions. But on the other hand, it's like, by legalizing it, we're helping to make it safer, and less people have the same number of abortions anyways. By making it legal, it's safer and less people die from unsafe medical procedures. It's the same thing with legalizing street drugs like marijuana. And some people are like, on the one hand, we don't want to legalize marijuana because that's going to encourage more people to use it, and that's a bad thing. And on the other hand, people are like, well, we should legalize it because people are going to use it either way. If we legalize it, we can make sure that it and other drugs are safer, and we can also implement taxes on them to bring more revenue into the economy and other stuff like that. So it's like, see what I mean?
Note, we are not comparing Pastor Lee to a drug dealer in any way, because, yeah.
The opinions of the argument, which you may have just drawn, do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast in any way whatsoever.
They only reflect Devin, because Devin has very strong opinions about things.
Okay, I don't know if I get a point for this or not, and by that I mean I do get a point for this, because I called it immediately that the social worker guy was at the assembly at the school and he heard the speech about the parents.
Well, I wasn't paying attention enough to call something like that.
I called it 100%, so...
Here, I'm actually going to keep a tally.
Please don't.
No, I'm keeping a tally. This is the way I work.
Downfall. Oh, why?
No, it's just like when my friend told me she was always right. She said it so many times. She said, I'm always right, Siobhan. This Siobhan. She's like, I'm always right. She said this all the time.
I could have guessed it was Siobhan.
What?
I said I could have guessed it was Siobhan.
And so then I started counting every single time she was wrong for about a month. And by the end of the month, we had by the end of about a week, I had 23 points scored up. And then she was just like getting so mad at me.
You know why? Because you know what 1 Corinthians 13 says? It says, love does not keep a record of wrongs. Word for word, that's what it says.
That may be true, but I'm keeping a tally of this. And my name goes first. It says,
Victoria.
Because I have 8 points and you only have 2.
Okay, so to get back to the episode, the whole speech that their daughter gave at the school was perfect. Like, they completely perfectly nailed the point about God's design for our lives, regardless of the form that it takes. And I think that's a really big issue in the church today, because I've heard of a lot of people calling themselves Christians who seek to change anyone who's disabled or different in any mental or physical way. Many children have died because of parents who have fervently held to the belief that their children were imperfect, sinful, or marred because of the ways that they were born, for any number of like mental or physical reasons. And so it's a very important message, and the way that they turned it from, it's interesting because the way they considered the theme and all the bonus stuff for the episode was about the theme of adoption. But I was like, that's not really what this episode was about at all to me. I mean, it was sort of about adoption, but the bulk of the episode was about ableism and recognizing God's purpose no matter who we are or what we're like on the outside. Outside also includes the brain.
If it was about adoption, I think we would have had one of the kids actually having issues with being abandoned, like more issues than...
That's a very good point, yeah.
The normal ones. And also, we probably would have gotten a speech by Eugene, like along the same lines as what he said to Kelly and
in
stuff.
The Chosen One, yeah. Also along the same lines of what I was
At least
saying.
We got a charity. Let's just say that.
I also think that, and this is kind of borderline, but I think that there was an indirect comment about abortion in here to the same effect of what I just said. Because I think it was Whit who made a comment about how some parents believe it's more merciful for a child to be in heaven sooner because of their mental or physical conditions than for them to be alive and suffering. Like, they assume that must be the case, not that it's a possibility. And I would assume that this is a reference to parents who have abortions because they discover that their child will be born with disabilities that they don't know how to handle, and they think that it's too much for them or their child, and so they end that life right there rather than trying to take on the responsibility or believing that it's too much suffering for the child to have to live with those things, and so they abort the child instead.
In biology, we were dissecting fetal pigs, and person I was partnered up with, I'm not going to say what their name is or anything, but I kept on saying like, oh, this pig looks like I kept on calling it like a baby instead of a fetus and stuff like that, and saying it looked like, basically it looked like it was almost full grown, like really close to being full grown.
Yeah, because you need it to be as developed as like fully mature. Yeah.
And I kept on calling it a baby, and the person I was partnered up with kept on saying like, well, it's not technically a baby. And I'm like, well, it's just like abortions, like it's a baby and stuff. And she's like, no, it's not. And I'm like, yes, it is. And there were odd points throughout the 2-day dissection where we kind of
2-day dissection.
Yeah, the dissection lasted 2 days.
What did you do overnight then?
We kind of just threw them in a bucket.
Okay, I think we ran out of time. Yeah, so we did ours in 1 day, very fast.
But yeah, I'm not an argumentative person. I'm not good at arguments really, unless I have 100% a billion things to back me up. But like, especially when I feel slightly uncomfortable about the topic, I can't really argue it very well. And you know how I do with really serious topics, Devin.
And it's a hard and controversial topic. topic to.
And the person I was talking to also has very strong opinions about many things. I think
Is
you
it
know
someone that I know?
Yeah, yeah, it is. And I'm not saying that they're a difficult person or anything. They're one of my closest friends, but like,
But yeah, I mean, people have
yeah.
different.
So,
But yeah, I definitely think that they were trying to imply that here with that. It's like a
yeah,
Gattaca kind of
one
thing.
of the things she said, like, well, it's like whenever a baby gets an abortion, it's not just like I want to get rid of the baby. It's usually because they have problems with their body or something like
Yeah, and
that.
that's what makes it such a complex issue. But that's, another
Yeah,
talk for
my
another time.
response was basically like, well, still. And
Anyways,
yeah.
so truly this was a very serious episode, and I'm really glad that the team gave it the gravitas that it deserved. It was handled very well, I think. And then to go on to the bonus stuff for the episode, so the pastor in this story is a real guy, which is super cool, and it's all true. And I suppose that's to be expected. I mean, it makes sense, but still, like, wow, that's dedication. Like, he is a real person, and he actually does all that stuff. It's crazy. The video had an A113 reference in it at 116 in the video. It's the room number, and I was like, whoa, that's crazy. You know what I mean?
A113?
Like in Pixar films, you know how they always show like A113 all the time because it's a reference to animators who studied at the California Institute of the Arts. So like lots of movies and animations, basically every single Pixar movie has A113 somewhere on it,
Yeah.
license plate, stuff like that. So yeah, that was the room number that they like pasted over the door in the video. So I was like, that's really interesting. I wonder if anyone on the team studied at the CIA, the California Institute of the Arts, not the Central Intelligence Agency, or if A113 if it's just supposed to be a reference to the fact that that room number has become independently famous because of Pixar using it so much. I don't know. It was really nice to me that this episode was able to cover adoption from a new angle for the show, because it has been covered previously on Odyssey with the Kelly storyline and mentioned for Eugene, but those were very different circumstances for both of them. So that was good that we got that. And they had an adoption expert come in and do a Q&A, and I was really glad about that, and that they weren't just answering common questions that kids might have about adoption, but they also pointed out the ones which are offensive to ask, which I thought was really important, such as one of the questions answered was, did you do something wrong to be adopted? Which I guess I was like,
oh my goodness.
But I guess apparently that's a question that some kids ask adopted kids, and I was like,
that's so terrible.
I know. So they answered questions, and they also pointed out the ones that you shouldn't say to adopted kids, and I was like, that's good.
Yeah.
It's really, really cool. Okay, so they did a video looking at this kid who was adopted and had disabilities, and then his name was Ruri, and they had him tell his story about being bullied and stuff as he was a child who was didn't have several fingers, and he told this story about how he was bullied in school because of his hands and how he wore gloves for a long time. And then it was revealed that he was like the girl in the episode who became school president in the episode. That she in the story, that's who he is in real life. So they started telling his story and stuff like that, and then revealed that that was actually the daughter in the episode, and he, just like the girl in the episode, went on to run for, student president and win. And to be there from being someone who was like constantly bullied and stuff because of his disability. So that was also true, and that was super cool. I got super hungry because Bob Smithhauser and the two kids went to a Korean restaurant, and they had a super long cooking montage of all this food, and it made me be extremely hungry. And so the coolest thing about all of this, or beyond the fact that this is all a true story, is the fact that the reason they made this episode is because in spring this year, in 2015, which is next year, that Focus is going to be making a movie called The Dropbox, and it will be all about Pastor Lee and the whole story. So
is it going to be like a live action movie?
Yeah, a documentary about him and stuff. And this is an episode to accompany it. Kind of like how they did the Amazing Grace tie-in and stuff back in album 30. So, yeah, that's super cool. So, look forward to that in the spring. Go see it and learn even more about the true story of Pastor Lee, or Ree, however you want to pronounce it in English. Could go either way. And his ministry then, Kindred Image, is what it's called, is obviously the charity for this month. So yeah, it's crazy when they go into detail on the OAC how many of the facts in this episode they kept true for it. It's super cool. And that's everything I have to say. What do you have to say, Victoria?
I don't know. I'm sorry for yawning. I liked this episode. I have to listen to it again because I am extremely tired from exams and stuff, so I wasn't completely 100% coherent during the episode, but from what I heard, it was really good. It was pretty inspirational, and it was a good story. And even better, it's one of those stories where you're like, oh, this is amazing, and then you find out it's a true story. And
yeah, that's what I like about, same thing with the launch, right? I fell in love with how amazing this story was and inspirational it was, and then I found out that it was all true, and then you're like, so, yeah, that's cool.
So,
what do you give it?
Oh, we're giving an individual rating.
It's an individual episode. This isn't a ties that bind part.
My hair is really messy. I will give it a 3.7 out of 5.
All right, I'm going to give it a 4.8 out of 5. Very high. Because
I bet if I was paying more attention during the episode, I'd give it a higher rating. But I'm just so tired.
Ratings
I need to
always
go to
change
bed right
every
now.
time I listen to an episode. But yeah, this was...
Yeah.
The multiple topics that were nuanced together in this episode were handled so well and just given so much time to talk about them over and over and just kind of get into depth. It wasn't like there's so many episodes where the topics just kind of brushed over lightly, vaguely relevant to the story, but the characters in the story just kept on over and over talking in detail about this and the theology behind it and the emotions behind it. And it's so relevant and very heavy and serious and just done so well, especially to the fact that this was all done in the context of a true story that they were telling. So, yeah. That's what I have to say.
So, I'm really sorry. I know I'm supposed to be higher energy because it's the 50th episode, but I need to go to bed because I have school tomorrow morning. I have to go to school and work.
On that positive note, let's start over to our second half.
Hi, guys.
Blue skidoo, we can static.
Woo!
And we're back here. Second half of episode 50.
Woo!
Party blower. Woo! Talking about episode number
50. You're so uncreative.
What is it, Victoria?
Pardon?
What episode is it?
Karen.
Yes. Written by Paul McCusker.
Polly.
tell us what happens in this.
Everything's written by Paul.
Very
It's like we don't review anything by anyone else.
No, sorry, Phil and Nathan and Kathy and everyone else.
It's totally not
Dave.
like Kathy wrote Life Expectancy. Did she?
That was Paul.
That was Paul. Oh, well, yeah, we only review things by Paul.
Actually, we review everything that's new, so
I know.
What happens in this very intense emotional episode?
So Donna's best friend is a girl named Karen, and Karen gets cancer around the same time as their school
Fall festival.
And so Karen was going to be in it, but now obviously she can't. She has to get her leg amputated. She gives Donna her cat named Ferguson, who you see in other episodes, like Castles and Cauldrons. And in the end, Karen gets to perform one last time at the Fall Festival before she dies.
The end. For Karen.
Yeah.
Except not, because
you
she goes to
followed
heaven.
Donna throughout the episode and what she emotionally goes through.
Okay. I always start, so do you have any opening things to say about Karen right off the bat?
Yes, this is an important episode for many reasons. A lot of things that later happened to Donna happened because of this episode. A lot of things in this episode later define her character about certain things, and this is also the origins of Ferguson and how she gets Ferguson. Ferguson is in a lot of episodes, and other episodes not like a lot, but in
Several.
a lot of Donna episodes. What's that one? Album 5, Mrs. Hooper.
Yes, An Encounter with Mrs. Hooper.
Yeah, in that one, for example, you see how Donna deals with Mrs. Hooper because she lost Karen when she was younger. And then this episode is the predecessor to The Very Best of Friends, which is like a sequel to this episode in Album 7.
Yes. And takes place exactly 1 year later.
Mm-hmm.
So to start right from the beginning of the episode, Chris reads all of Psalm 23, and I've always really loved how this episode begins. And it's not only because it's a scripture reading and that particular scripture, but because of how calmly and somber it is, because there aren't very many episodes that open with a scripture reading for one at all. The Battle Part 1 is one. Hold Up
Waylaid
is another.
Does Waylaid
No, it
do
doesn't.
that? Oh.
Chris is like, there are surprises that you like and surprises that you don't.
Never mind.
It sounds quite a lot like the opening to Pamela Has a Problem as well. Anyways, there aren't very many episodes that open with a scripture reading, and the way that Chris reads it really sets a very peaceful but somber tone at the same time, which is really good. It doesn't one of the first episodes to open in a really different way like that, and it really sets the tone for the episode. Yes.
Sorry, I'm going to say something that's totally going to ruin the mood. Pamela has a problem being like black, like waylaid in Windy City. That's like Blackbird has a problem, but instead of like Pamela's problem, his problem is he's gay. Gay Blackbird.
That was completely unrelated to everything, Victoria.
Yes, it is. I'm sorry. Carry on.
I am obligated to forgive you. Karen, to me, is still one of the most powerful episodes that has ever been written for the show. It's not terribly often that characters die on Adventures in Odyssey. A lot more frequently than Fairy Tale, but still not super often. And it's so much more infrequent with kids dying. Karen's peace throughout this entire episode and her serenity and trust in Jesus in the literal face of death has been something that has deeply stuck with me for years and years since I first heard it. And the ways that she reacts to every single twist of the knife of fate with laughter and jokes and positivity, and her faith strong throughout all of it, is something that I've always kept close to my heart since then, and that I've tried to generally model my life after ever since I first heard this episode years ago. So it's always been a very special one for me.
Aww.
Oh. I've always thought it was really interesting that they talk about Karen's phantom feelings in her legs here. I think that's interesting. It's where I first heard about them, and we actually talked about them a fair bit in my psychology class this year in the sensation and perception unit. So I thought that was interesting.
This episode is another one of those instances which actually regularly occurs with me, where I learn something in Odyssey that I can actually apply to in school, and I can actually get the answer right to one of the questions a teacher is asking. Like in my biology class, my teacher was talking about like when you feel something that isn't there, and it's like, oh, that's a phantom feeling.
My favorite instance of knowing something in school because of Odyssey was in Bi 11, I guess, when you're talking about plants. And Mr. Lafleur was like, what are the two types of, two main categories of flowering plants? And I put my hand, and I was like, total guess here, monocotyledonous and dicotyledonous. And he was like, yes. And I was like, thank you, Wooten.
Yeah, there's one moment in grade 5 where I was at Fort Steele, and there's this really scary teacher because we were in like an olden school day reenactment. And she was really scary. If you like did anything bad or you didn't call her ma'am, she'd like give you lines. And then they did this reenactment, but we didn't know it was one at the time, where she put her inkwell in someone's desk, and then she yelled at them, and she carried them outside. And then she pretended to whip them, and we heard like whipping noises from outside, and we came back in, and the kids' hands were covered in blood. And it wasn't till I was a couple years older that I figured out that was a simulation. Like, that was fake, because I thought that actually happened. And I was like so scared. I felt like crying every single time she looked at me. It was terrifying. And like, she did the, oh, I'm gonna say some riddles, and then she said the St. Ives poem, like riddle that Wit does, and so like no one knew it, and then I'm just like, I know
get
it,
that.
ma'am.
Like, that's literally the most common riddle in the world.
Like no one knew it 'cause we were in grade 5.
So I've known that since I was in kindergarten.
Whatever. Like, I stood up and I knew it, and I was like so proud of myself, and I was just like, I have power over the teacher. No, actually, I didn't think that. I still felt like crying, but
anyways, back to the episode. I think it's pretty close, but I think the most poignant scene, or in first of pairs of scenes in this episode, is Karen's dream about Jesus that she has, and this line, I have something better for you too, Karen. It's one of the most difficult topics that we can struggle with as Christians. What is the meaning of suffering and death? And there is, of course, no easy answer to that, as we saw in life expectancy. And Jesus asserts to Karen here that she will die, yes, but all to the betterment of herself and everyone else. And this is an incredibly deep and painful and hard statement to swallow. As Wooten said, you can't explain the nature of water, to someone as they drown. And to try and tell a parent that there's divine purpose of the death of their child is absolutely impossible. However, consider Karen's death. It deeply affected everyone at Wits End, especially Donna, but perhaps
Connie. I forgot to mention
perhaps
Connie.
The most dramatic effect was on Connie. The episodes directly succeeding this one, the literal next consecutive episodes after Karen, episodes 51 and 52, are Connie part 1 and 2. In it, we hear 2 separate flashbacks from this episode as Connie struggles with the idea of faith. Wit specifically says to Tom that Karen's death deeply affected Connie and may have been one of the main triggers that pushed her into returning to California, which eventually led to her accepting Jesus. So from the ashes of Karen's death, Connie's faith was born, and consider the bountiful fruit that's been born from that faith over the years. Consider the lives turned to Christ, the tears dried, the paths corrected, and the hearts inspired by Connie because Karen's death helped spurn her to Jesus. Now, I am not saying that when someone dies, we should claim that God killed them to serve some other purpose. Like I said, you can't explain water to the drowning. However, I think that looking over the course of this show, we really can see the grand design of what Jesus really meant in Karen's dream, because he really did have something better. Any comments?
I'm all emotional, Devin.
Any
You're
comments
so
on that?
mean.
Do you have anything
No,
to say, or do you want me to go on?
Now I'm sad.
It's a sad
okay.
episode.
What are their names? Was it Oscar at the time, or did he go by a different name? Like the two boys that are in the episode, and then every now and then, like I think twice, it cuts to them talking about Karen.
I'm not sure if it names who they are.
Like
I don't think it's Oscar.
It sounds like Oscar's VA, but like
I don't
if you
think it's anyone that we know.
Okay.
It's definitely not Oscar, I'm quite certain.
I like that. Okay, I always thought it was Oscar, so I guess this doesn't really apply as much, but still kind of does. Normally when you have like a really serious episode, then you have like little intercuts between like some of the kid guy characters. It's usually to like interject some comedy or something like that.
Do you have another example of this?
I don't know, maybe just like in shows in general or something like that.
Okay, go on. Maybe I'll understand what you're talking about.
There's no point in this where they're like, oh, let's throw lots of comedy at you or something like that. Like, there's never any point in this episode. Basically, what I'm getting at is where it doesn't take what it's talking about seriously. And I really appreciate that. This episode was one of the first most serious episodes in the whole show. It was one of the first ones that also really dealt with death. The very, very first one being Recollections. And so, yeah, I really, really love this episode for a lot of reasons. And I don't know, I think my three favorite scenes are, one, the scene where Karen and Donna are talking in the hospital, the one you talked about. Two, the one where Karen is at the fall festival and she's presenting her thing, because that scene always gets me really emotional. And it was either the song she did there or the song that Donna did in Very Best of Friends. And one time we started singing it in church, and when we did, I almost started crying. I think it might have been Donna's song though. And then three, the scene where, at the very end, where they find Ferguson. And Whit's like, you won't forget Donna, and it's so sad.
Besides the fact that I honestly don't really know what you're talking about cutting to guy characters for comedy moments.
It's because I thought it was Oscar because it sounds like the same voice as Oscar. So I thought it was Oscar, and they usually use him for like lots of comedic relief, so I was glad they didn't do that.
Anyways, besides that, I have to say that I semi-object to your point in that even while everything in the episode is taken seriously, I think that one of the strong points about Karen's person in this episode, and I kind of touched on it in my spiel earlier, is the fact
I agree with you on that.
That she isn't serious through the whole time. I mean, she is serious, but she does still make jokes and laugh through all of it, which is one of those things that, like I said, is, that struck me and has stuck with me for so long, is the fact that her faith and confidence in Jesus and his resurrection and eternal life is so confident that in the face of death that she can look at it with not gleeful abandon, but with the confidence that she can make jokes because she knows that death has no sting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so to come back to what you're saying about the hymns, Karen reads the hymn In the Land of Fadeless Day, and it is an incredibly powerful scene. And the really cool thing about it is that the power comes from the simplicity and the minimalism of the scene to me. There's no band, there's no singing or dancing. It's just Karen calmly and flatly and quietly reading the lyrics with a little bit of gentle background music, which then amplifies the power tenfold when Donna, builds on what she did in The Very Best of Friends. And then the other scene that I would tie for first is where Karen talks with Donna about death just before she dies, and it really matches with the intensity of her dream scene. She explicitly states that the peace that she has with the idea of death is absolute, and I can think of nothing more inspiring than to hear this kind of faith from someone so young, that she is like so rock solidly assured of her salvation like that. And this episode is so good.
I don't have a lot to say because if I say anything, I'll probably get really emotional. So.
Okay. I'll keep going then. I've always thought that it was a very interesting writing choice to skip as much as they did at the end of the episode. Because we hear Karen talk to Donna about death, and then we cut straight and hard to a week after her funeral. So her final days, her death, and a lot of subsequent time, including the funeral, are all left out of the episode. And I think it's really interesting. And to me, the point of that is that it really goes to show how powerful Karen's lines were. She said so much more in her life than we normally get from this sort of story, so we didn't need to hear it after death. Usually in this kind of setup, you'd have, a character before they die, they'd be like, I'm sad and I wish I'd done these things, I have regrets, but I have faith and stuff. And it's a lot of mourning, and then after they're done, it's like, it's at the funeral that we hear these comforting words of wisdom and retrospection and looking forward to the future with hope after this disaster. But by contrast, this episode didn't need to include any of that stuff after the death, because Karen's faith was so strong that she was able to have that perspective herself before she even died. That all of that retrospection and the wisdom and the comfort that we normally get, after time's passed and people have started to stop grieving over it, or they're starting to come to terms with it. Karen had that before she died, even while still knowing that that was what was coming for her. And because of that, they didn't need to include the funeral or anything like that, because Karen already gave that before she died. And that to me is like, wow. So yeah,
I want to meet Paul McCusker and give him a hug.
Her wisdom allowed her to take the sage words and emotions given after death and express them before she was gone. I really would have wanted to see what would have become of Karen as a character if she hadn't gotten bone cancer and had lived longer on the show.
Another interesting tidbit for those of you who didn't notice this or haven't listened to the episode. What's her name? Sage?
Sage, that's exactly what I was about to say.
Yeah.
Do you want me to read the actual thing?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Once, we're finally reviewing an old enough episode that I can have behind the scenes information from the official guide. So, behind the scenes. Karen was loosely based on a true incident that happened to a friend of Sage Bolte, daughter of executive producer Chuck Bolte. Coincidentally, Sage played the voice of Karen. Now, I had completely forgotten about this fact, and it's really, really incredible
I did too.
when you think about it. Like, Sage Bolte had, and of course she later went on to play Robin Jacobs, she had to portray a character in the final days of life when that character was actually one of her own personal friends that she lost at that young of an age.
I wouldn't be able to do that.
Just think about that, losing your best friend and then having to portray that role on the radio like that.
I would not be able to do that.
I mean, it hurts enough to think about like what Hal Smith went through recording The Mortal Coil, but imagine Sage Bolte losing someone that young and still being that young when making that episode, and think how much more that would have, like, oh my goodness. So that's all my thoughts on the episode.
I don't want to talk about this anymore.
What are your final thoughts, Victoria?
I don't know. First off, I'm sorry about that stupid thing I said earlier.
It's all right. I forgive you. Not just because I'm obligated to.
Thank you. Oh man, this episode. This episode is... If I had to make my own personal album about what defines Adventures in Odyssey, I think I would put this episode in the album. What about you?
Well put. It's a very high compliment.
This episode encompasses so much of what Odyssey is about and wants to be, and how it doesn't talk down to children, and it like kind of like shines a light on children that you wouldn't otherwise see in other mediums or types of media or something like that, or other shows or series. Especially like they're getting better at portraying kid characters, but like lots of people still struggle with it like today in media. But think about like how long ago this episode was made.
Yeah.
So like the fact that like Odyssey does, the fact that Odyssey just like always does that.
1988, like, late 1988.
Yeah, like you have to have so much respect for what they do with all their characters because of how they do this. And this episode is so amazing, and I cannot articulate it into words, and in my opinion it has the perfect ending for the episode. It like ends on a bittersweet note, which is why I really love the last scene. With like Ferguson coming back, and then like I said before, with like Donna is worried that she might forget about Karen. Especially because
I mean, spoilers, next for December we're going to for the next review of OAC stuff, we're going to review The Very Best of Friends, since it's a sequel to this. No point in hiding that. It's in the description right now if you scroll down. I have a lot to say about one line that Donna says about Ferguson in that episode. I have a lot to say about that one line and why it's like possibly the best line in the episode.
I think I actually have more to say about The Very Best of Friends than I do about Karen, honestly. I don't know, maybe it's because I first heard The Very Best of Friends when I was a bit older, so I think it was easier for me to emotionally connect with that episode slightly.
I don't think you would have heard The Very Best of Friends before you heard Karen.
Yeah, never mind. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Sorry to deflate your line there.
No, I was thinking like, no, that's wrong, even while I was saying it. So
yeah, we had album 7 before we had. That was one of the few albums that we had before we started going chronologically.
And anyway, this episode is just, I can't. You rate.
Okay. When Paul McCusker put this episode to paper, every single word and line of this episode through the
so
script,
realistic.
And like every single intonation of the voice that the actors brought to this is a masterstroke. There is nothing in this episode that goes wasted to me in terms of taking things and turning them towards the point. there are very few times in Adventures in Odyssey or media in general where you can take such young actors and such young characters and be able to, in such a short time, craft such incredibly complex, deep, emotionally moving, personas and have them dance around a plot line that is so deep and serious and moving and heavy. And it's just not something else that you see replicated or that you even can replicate again very easily. This episode stands very high above the majority of other Odyssey episodes in seriousness and emotion and just the ways that every little thing, like I talked about, all the little writing choices, when you look into them, they just betray so much meaning and forethought, and it's just so well written.
You mean
and it's
portray?
What?
You mean portray?
Where?
You said betray, meaning in forethought. Do you mean portray?
No, I meant betray.
Okay.
As in show. They show lots of forethought. It's one of those episodes where you can definitely tell, if not that for every episode, especially for ones like Karen, that, God had a strong hand in the writing of this episode to craft it into something that would be spiritually impactful on the people who would hear it, myself included. And so for all of those reasons and more, I will absolutely give it, obviously, 5 out of 5.
Yeah, I think you touched on all the bases. There's not a lot to say, and if I say anything, I'm gonna get really emotional, and I wouldn't enjoy that. So I'm gonna give this 5 out of 5 stars. And I don't know, in terms of emotionalness, this one never made me cry or anything. Probably the most emotional child death thing involved in the show that made me cry was Forever Amen.
Really?
So,
Interesting.
Yeah, that one made me cry.
Never really cared
really
for that
hard
episode.
when I first heard it. What?
I've never really cared for that episode very much. It's interesting.
It'd take a while to explain why that one made me cry really hard and actually run out of my room and go find my mom when I first heard it. But I don't really want to get into it because I'll get even more emotional.
Yes, and that we are out of time for now anyways. Yeah. And that's not the episode we're reviewing, and we finished the episode we are reviewing, so I believe that is the end of this episode.
Okay.
So, next time we'll be reviewing The Ties That Bind, parts 11 and 12, for episode 51 of the Adventures in Odyssey Oddcast. So, until then, thank you for joining us on our side of the YouTube. I've been Devin Francis, also known as Leonard Meltzner.
I've been Victoria Francis, other known as I really need to make an OAC account and name it Jared Dwight if that name's still up.
Probably not.
Darn it.
And until then, I already said that.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.
Happy 50th episode!
Yay!
Woo!
High
Napkin.
five, Devin! Yeah.